I'm curious. So, you obviously work with a lot of people who are dealing with some sort of mental health struggle. Do you see that there's a correlation with let's say that they're not dealing with like something with their finances in particular, like whatever it might be in their personal life, relationships, or what have you? Do you see that could sometimes have a correlation to how they manage their finances, that they let the other important area, or even their fitness, right? They let these other important areas go because maybe what seems like a more crucial or more pressing area of their life is falling apart.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I understand your question correctly, I think what comes to my mind is managing your money well is a form of self-care. You
Mm,
know, like if you're managing your money well and you're saving, or, you're not spending excessively, and you're
hmm
hitting your goals, like that's a way of taking care of yourself. So I think similar to fitness, when you're exercising or when you're eating well, like that's a form of self-care. And so when you're really prioritizing self-care, then that's something that you're going to prioritize, and it's something that you're going to like make room for. But when areas in your life are kind of feeling disheveled and you aren't making room for self-care and you're not prioritizing that, then things like money and making sure that you're taking care of your health in other ways is going to go by the wayside.
I love that you call dealing with your finances self-care, because it's funny when sometimes when I'm talking with someone through like what's going on in their budget or in their finances, they're like, well, I have to make room for self-care with my spending, even though I'm in deep credit card debt, or even though I don't have an emergency fund, or my finances are falling apart, or I might be evicted, whatever it is. They're like, I have to make room for self-care. This is a form of like, you gotta like, and this is almost one of the more obvious like this and fitness, I would say, are the two most obvious forms of self-care, because it's like if these don't get taken care of, everything else falls apart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I know that when I see my clients who have struggled with money start to really get on the right track, with hitting their financial goals and saving enough and doing all of that, like I see that they feel lighter. They feel more at ease. They feel more secure, which makes so much sense because money is and that getting that
Hmm.
financial security is such a huge part of just feeling okay,
Yeah.
right? And like feeling safe and feeling secure in your housing or in your, being able to put food on your table. Like those things are just fundamental needs, right? And so that's why I categorize it as self-care, because when we look at like being able to just care for yourself in the most fundamental ways, like that is self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but like I always like think of, managing your money as like, taking care of your like you're in a financial hygiene, like as if you were to brush your teeth every day. Like brushing my teeth is not my favorite activity, but I do it because I know if I don't, I'm going to get cavities and I don't want to have to go to the dentist for that. Same reason why I take care of my money, because I know that if I don't take care of my money, I'm going to end up in a bad place with it. Right. So I always I always tell Nick that like kind of use that same scenario there, and so I like that you call it self-care. I never really called it that before, but I think I'm going to moving forward, because you're right. It's something you need to take care of. But something you talked about was, when you're being pressured into doing something and then you just fall off for the rest of the day. I think a lot of people, have a lot of, shame and guilt when it comes to money, because they can't stick to something and they just constantly feel like a failure. I see that a lot when someone really wants to get out of credit card debt and then an emergency pops up and they just, or, they want to go out with friends or whatever, and they just continue to go in debt. How do people, I'm sure this is something that you deal a lot with clients, but how do people move past that, shame or guilt to actually be able to, build that self-trust within them to move forward? I guess, if they've had all this experience with failure, how do they move past that shame and guilt? Because I think that's something that comes up a lot with money,
Yeah.
that we see.
Yeah. I mean, I think the number one thing that goes through my mind is helping those people differentiate and not, well, differentiate the fact that they're struggling with money and that this is something that this is like a struggle and it is not who they are.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because I think once people adopt this mentality of, well, I'm bad with money, that's like you identifying as that. I'm
Yeah.
just a person who's bad with money, right?
Yeah.
I just fail at managing my money, right? Like that in and of itself, you're just setting yourself up for just an uphill battle. right? But instead, if you say something like, I'm a person who right now is trying to make, prioritize making different financial decisions. You see how that just feels so different?
Yep.
Like it feels so different just saying it that way. So I think like helping them recognize that there's a difference between a pattern of behavior of like overspending and who they are as a person. That just because they cannot manage their money does not make them a failure. It just makes them a person who is not prioritizing it right now.
Yeah.
Right. Or that they're needing more support for whatever reason. Right. And that's okay, that there's nothing wrong with needing more support. And I also think like normalizing it too is also super helpful. Like it is, and you guys know, like this is so unbelievably common for people to just struggle with managing money. And I think the temptation out there, keeping up with the Joneses, wanting cool things, like I think that makes it tough. But I also think if we're never really taught these things, like it's also kind of crazy how like in school, middle school, high school, college, like there's nowhere where you're actually taught how to manage your money. But we're just kind of expected to know how to do it. And that's not fair. You know what I mean? Like maybe we're expected to learn it from our parents, but if our parents aren't good with money, like then how are we going to learn it? Right. Or if our parents don't teach us. And so, I also just think like helping people recognize and like instead just be curious about what is it that's causing the problem and them being able to execute what it is that they need to execute. So instead of being judgmental of themselves, well, I'm such a failure, instead be curious and ask a question of like, why is this so difficult for me? Like, instead of being like, God, I'm so bad at this, I'm such a failure. Instead say, like, what was it that made it really difficult for me to not buy that thing that I shouldn't have bought? There was clearly something that was going on for me. Like I really needed it. I felt like I needed it. Why did I feel like I needed it? And then sometimes that exploration could mean like, oh yeah, like I was really stressed out about this one thing and I just felt like buying this thing might make me feel better. Right? Like sometimes you can get to that self-awareness or that insight. And then you kind of can then learn something about yourself. Oh, I'm a person who when I'm stressed, I tend to want to buy things. Wow. Like look at how much information you just got about yourself just by being curious and asking yourself that question. And then seeing that as data to then inform how you want to approach it differently, right? Like, okay, I know when I'm in a high stressful situation, I'm tempted even more. So what am I going to do differently moving forward when I'm really stressed? And instantly you can just see that how we talk about it feels different. It's not ridden with guilt and shame and, oh my God, I suck at this. Instead, it's like, oh, I'm just a person who struggles with this when I'm stressed. Like, that's understandable. Like, okay, so what am I going to do differently? And what kind of support do I need to set up for myself?
Yeah, I love that. And I think we talk about this a lot, but like, when you are trying to change from a place of shame and guilt, it just makes you feel even worse. Like I think about the biggest example is obviously money, but also like dieting. Like if you hate yourself and you're going to the gym, why is that it's not going to be a fun experience. You know what I mean? Like you have to like drop all of that and view it from a different lens to actually like make the changes. So yeah, I love everything you said there. The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.